There is a place that is spoken about only in whispers, a dark area that spawns the beginnings of urban legends, a place where anything can happen and usually does. During the light of day, it hides just outside of view, but when the sun goes down, spirits, creatures of the night, roam free, and things do go bump in the night. It is in every state and every country, and there is no escaping it, no matter how safe you feel behind your locked doors and latched windows. So we invite you to turn down the lights and turn up your radio while we join Dave Schrader and Tim Dennis, your hosts, on a journey into the darkness on the edge of town.
Hello and welcome. You're tuned in to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. Today, we're going to talk about a topic I'm always fascinated with, Houdini. Harry Houdini, one of my idols. I love to pick up and read anything I can on this guy. I love watching documentaries, films, even novels that are fictionalized versions of his tales excite me. They're just, what an amazing man and such a fascinating, rich life he led. We're going to be joined in a few minutes by Bob Loomis. We're going to talk about his book, Houdini's Final Incredible Secret, the true story of how Houdini mystified the creator of Sherlock Holmes. And our guest this evening, Bob Loomis. He is a magic circle librarian. He's a Canadian living in England. We'll forgive him for that. And he's lectured on Houdini to Hollywood superstars Catherine Zeta-Jones and Guy Pearce. And according to him, he even claims to have held her hand. And Guy Pearce's, so that puts him in the same category. Although recently appearing as himself in Lorna Gibbs' novel A Ghost Story, he insists that he is definitely not a figment of her imagination, but would love to be a cartoon character. In the world of magic, Bob is a feature article writer for the Magic Circular, editor of the Magical Spectator, a magic circle librarian, one of only 3 honorary associates of the Inner Magic Circle, president of the Association of International Magical Spectators, and holder of the Order of Merlin Excalibur of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. And that puts my subscription to Ranger Rick magazine to shame. That's about all I've got going for me, Bob. You seem to be a lot more in touch with cooler things than I am.
Many thanks, Dave. You made me sound like a guy I'd like to meet, actually.
Well, let me ask a little bit about your background. Magic.
Fire away.
What brought you to magic as a fascination growing up?
Yeah. Well, magic tends to be something that you get as a child. One of two things normally happens. You either see a magician and you think, wow, that's cool, I want to do that. Or you get a magic set for Christmas. And if you ever get one, don't open the lid, because each one contains a magic bug. They jump out and bite you, and that's it. There's no known way of getting around it. No. Once you got the disease, you've had it. So I had the usual. I opened the magic set. That was about the age of 11-ish. And then in some cases, you discover girls, and it kind of dies for a while. But in my case, it kind of carried on a bit. And around the age of something around 22-ish, I came to the UK, and it sort of picked up again from there.
Starting over without as many girls around you was a good focal point for you, huh?
Yeah. Well, I won't say I was trying to get away from some, but and then I discovered the Harry Price Library, which is let me just hold something up for you.
Sure.
And you can explain this to people what I'm holding up. This is the catalog of the Harry Price Library at the University of London. And it says short title catalog on the works of psychical research, spiritualism, magic, psychology, legerdemain, and other methods of deception, charlatanism, witchcraft, and technical works for the scientific investigation of allied abnormal phenomena. Phew.
Wow, that's a mouthful for a book title.
Yeah, and Harry himself was a ghost hunter.
Mm-hmm.
He collected this library of some 10,000 books, and amongst them were what I was after, books on magic, some of the early books, but also books on spiritualism and everything in between, and that kind of really hooked me.
Do you know, just out of curiosity, since you've studied so much on magic, where did the evolution of magic come from? Was it originally meant to entertain, or was it meant to try to intimidate invading hordes and pulling off illusions to make things look scarier, bigger, more dangerous than they were?
Yeah, going back that far, it really was in the early days. The earliest it can go back to is something akin to, and this is the way I kind of look at it. You got this little guy that's a meek little guy, and he can't really handle a sword. He's not that good, and he's on the verge of being thrown out of the group. And the leader says, oh dear. And he's walking through the woods, and he kicks a stone, hits another stone, a spark goes, and it starts a fire. He stamps it out, and he works out what had happened. So he goes back to the chief, and he says, I got a way of creating fire. The big God in the sky has given me this deal. I can even make your son be the next chief, instead of somebody coming and killing you off. And next thing you know, there's a religion, because he can create fire. And I think that was the beginning. And somewhere along the line, it split off into religion and entertainment. In other words, the guy stood on the street corner, put his hat down, and said, I'm going to do an escape here out of my straitjacket. Wow.
Yeah, I don't remember that part in the Bible, but I follow where you're going. Jesus, he was good at miracles, but I don't know if he could even get out of a straitjacket. The idea that magic has been around and it's been so entertaining, and it's entertained us for centuries, right? And further back, I mean, in the Bible, there's sorcery. There are
absolutely
sorcerers that work for the different pharaohs that they even mention in the Bible when the plagues are descending upon Egypt, that the sorcerers are like, listen, I can reproduce this, this, and this, so this is nothing to be fearful of. This is just an illusion and a trick that's being played on us. So that kind of thing has always existed.
Yeah, agree. There is the oldest recorded performance is of a magician called Didi, and he performed supposedly for Cheops, who built the pyramids, and did things like cut the head off a goose or duck and put it back on again.
Wow!
So it goes back that far, 4,000 plus years ago.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's recorded in what they call the Westcar Papyrus, which is in a museum in Berlin.
Now, what is the difference, can you tell me, between something like magic, as we know it today, and witchcraft?
Yeah, well...
Magical arts, I think that's called, right?
Yeah. Well, do you want me to... I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll tell you about the discovery of witchcraft.
That's perfect.
Right. So my first question to you is, what is the connection between beer, witchcraft, and magic? Now, when I use magic, I'll mean rabbits out of hats, let's say.
Okay. Beer, witchcraft, and magic. I don't know.
Okay. It's a fella called Reginald Scott.
Oh, right.
Now, Reginald Scott was the pioneer of hop growing and brewing, and he's acknowledged to be the father of beer. Now, if we've got any experts on beer that are listening, you'll probably find he's spelled S-C-O-T-T, whereas in magic we spell him S-C-O-T. He was also an amateur magician, and when he'd made his money by hop growing and brewing, the locals obviously thought he was a gentleman and made him the local judge. And now I'm talking about 1580s. And that would be the time when Shakespeare would be writing his various sonnets. You'd have Elizabeth I on the throne. And beer was the in thing because the water would kill you, whereas making the beer helped to sterilize it a bit. So when he was the judge, he found that he had these young ladies being brought up before him accused of devil worship. And he looked and he said, you shouldn't be burning these poor girls. So he wrote a book called The Discovery of Witchcraft. Now, it's available today. Let me just show you. Here we go. I'm holding it up front. You'll notice it's okay. First of all, it's mirror image, which doesn't help.
No, I can see it perfectly well. And for our listeners at home, I'm actually watching. We're having a conversation over Skype video, so those of you can't see it. But yeah, it's called The Discovery of Witchcraft.
That's it. Now, so it's still available today. Now, the only trouble is it's written in Shakespearean type English.
Oh, great. Okay.
So your magician, for example, will be called a juggler. Your spectators will be called beholders. So you've got to kind of work with it. As the most of it talks about the actual witchcraft and not burning of these poor girls, but the one section, and the section is based on the fact that some of the magicians of the period were calling themselves supernaturalists and using that kind of witchcraft-ish influence to do their magic, which Reginald knew was just sleight of hand. Mm-hmm. So he wrote a section, and I'll give you the title of the section that he wrote, of illusions, confederacies, and legerdemain, and how they may well or ill be used. And a lot of the stuff he put in there are still done today by magicians. Things like cards, coins, cups and balls, rope tricks. And for the next 200 years, it got copied and recopied in every book that was about magic. But there was a rider to this, and that is when James I came on the throne, he said, just a minute, this is a load of absolute rubbish. Scott was, I'm going to quote this, an Englishman of damnable opinions. There actually is witches and they should be burnt. So that put the book back another good 100 years. The intriguing thing as well is a lot of historians will tell you that the book was burnt by the public hangman on Tower Hill. Now, that's sort of to be taken by the grain of salt because it was several years after it was produced, but it could have been a token burning. The good thing for good old Scott was he died before King James came on the throne, or otherwise he could have been burned himself. The sort of tie-up with Houdini, let's try to get back to him because I often go off on a tangent, is that Houdini started with all of these basic tricks that are in the Discovery of Witchcraft. Mm-hmm. At one point, he even called himself the King of Cards. And if you look on YouTube, you can actually see Houdini doing tricks with cards.
Well, now, that's what I always found fascinating about him is how he was constantly evolving from everything from card tricks to master illusionist to escape artist to debunker to even medium and psychic in a sense when he would do his own performances that way. He really kind of always kept on the cutting edge of what the next big thing would be. Once everybody else would catch up with where he had been, he was already off into a new spin.
You got it. He was one ahead, for want of a better term, which could be a magic term as well, which I won't elaborate on. Would you like me to mention now Robert Houdin?
Yes, please do.
Now, he's a link between Houdini and going back to Reginald Scott and the Discovery. As a child, Houdini read the memoirs of Robert Houdin and was absolutely captivated, in fact. So I'll give you a quick overview of Robert Houdin, because if you look at the book, which I'll hold up again, there it is. This is his memoirs.
King of the Conjurers.
That's it.
Right.
Now, I don't know if you can make out the top line.
Yes, Memoirs of Robert-Houdin, Houdin.
Correct. Now, in French, and my French is rather poor, it's about the only thing I can say in French is Robert Houdin. But if you read it in English, it looks like Robert Houdin.
Yeah.
Now, what Houdini did was he added an I to the Houdin on the assumption it meant like Houdin. So far as Houdini was concerned, Houdini means like Houdin.
Oh, great. So that was his inspiration, was Robert Houdin.
You got it.
But why? Now, because the I adding it means like, so that was his homage to this great conjurer.
You got it.
Okay.
You got it. Now, do you want a little bit more about Robert Houdin?
Yes, please. How did he,
Okay.
when did he reign, and what was his expertise?
Yep. Well, Robert Houdin reigned, for want of a better term, in the second quarter of the 1800s. And he was the one that actually brought magic off the street corners, out of the pubs, into the theater. And he wore evening dress. And he was in a theater in Paris, which he'd constructed himself. And he became the go-to man for everyone in society. So suddenly, magic moved up a notch. He invented many illusions, but what he did that the others hadn't done, he got away from everything that had been put in the discovery by using new scientific principles. So, for example, he used electricity before people knew really what electricity was. Yeah, used to make electromagnets, things like that. He was actually a watchmaker who accidentally became a magician.
Okay.
And he became a magician accidentally because he bought 2 volumes on watchmaking, got them home, opened them up, and found out they were magic books. And again, as I said, as soon as you open a book, the magic bug jumps out and bites you. So he became, still there?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Good. I hit a button accidentally, and I was
we got disconnected. Sure. So wait, he bought 2 watchmaking books, and inside was actually.
Well, he thought they were watchmaking. They wrapped them up, gave them to him. When he got home, he unwrapped them and found out he had 2 magic books instead. So he couldn't stop. He opened them up, started reading them, and next thing you know, he had to become a magician. But he still used his clock-making background. So he constructed things like automatons, which were little fellows that mechanically operated and did magic. Typically, as a clockmaker, he had a clock on his home. Now, you've got to remember this was the early 1800s. Mm-hmm. People didn't have watches in their pockets. But he constructed a large clock on the top of his house so that everybody in the town could see what the time was. But nobody ever went and wound it. And in those days, all the clocks had to be wound.
Right.
So again, that was the magic of the clock. How did he do it? How did he make it work? He had it set up in such a way that every time his servants went through the kitchen door, they wound the clock up.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Pretty ingenious. So it's an illusion in front of your eyes. You're not seeing the magic behind what's making the clock run.
You got it. So in a way, he was using his scientific knowledge, but in a hidden. I'll give you another example. He also, if he couldn't use science, he made it look like he was using science. Now, an example of that would be what he called his ethereal illusion. It's one that's still done today by magicians, but he had his young son stand on a bit of a plinth, let's say about a foot high, put a support under each of his arms, a stick, let's say, under either arm. Then he brought out a little bottle and opened the top of the bottle and waved it under his son's nose. Now, in those days, ether had just been discovered, and people had heard about its properties and everything, and people could suddenly smell ether. And he then closed the bottle, took one of the supports away. His son fell asleep. He lifted his son's feet up into the air, and his son was horizontal on this stick that was just under his armpit, which was a levitation that's still done today by many magicians. But everyone said, it's terrible, he's using ether. But in fact, what was happening was someone backstage had heated up a shovel and put a few drops of ether on it.
Okay. Again, to create the illusion and make it bigger than it really was.
Correct. And it was a great marketing tool because people wrote to the newspapers and said, it's disgusting using ether on his young son. So I think this, again, is partly where Houdini got his great marketing skills from, doing that one. There's another connection as well with Houdini. and that is Robert Houdin retired around 1850. His son-in-law took over his theater, and eventually the theater was sold to a fellow called Méliès. Now, Méliès, if that rings a bell at all with any of your listeners, is one of the early cinema producers. He's the one that did The Flight to the Moon and a lot of the very, very early films. And recently, there's been a book produced on him, which I'm reaching for at the moment. And the book is by a fellow called Eric Barnu, called The Magician in the Cinema. Now, can you see me holding it up?
Yes, I can.
Now, as I lift it, what do you see? It looks like a robot.
Right.
And underneath that is a picture of somebody he's attacking. And who's that? Looks
like Harry Houdini, chained and ready to be attacked by a robot.
Absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. Because Méliès was the magician, and a lot of the early people in the cinema were magicians. In fact, Méliès' early films were of his illusions that he was presenting in Robert Houdin's theater. Now, the picture on the cover with Houdini being attacked with a robot, Houdini actually did 4 films himself in 1922 and 1926. And he introduced the first robot in a film.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I didn't realize Houdini was responsible for the first robot.
Yep. So the first robot in a film. So that's why it's on the jacket. So just one of the many things that Houdini was into. In the book, if you like, let me just quickly turn to the book. Here it is. In the introduction, you mentioned the different things that Houdini was doing. Mm-hmm. I mentioned in the book, I say, what else did Houdini accomplish? Talking about his escapes. And I then quote magical master of ceremonies, Dorney, who's a Chicago fellow. And I say he quite succinctly summed Harry up by saying that as well as an escapologist, he was a magician, illusionist, publicist, movie star, and that's where the films come in, and producer, and in addition, an author and humanitarian. Now, I've added to the list by saying he was also a magic shop owner, president of several magic clubs, a pioneer magic researcher, collector, and historian. And furthermore, a psychic investigator, an early aviator, an athlete, and finally a great animal lover and trainer. So he did a few things in his day.
Yeah, a little bit of an overachiever.
Yep. I then said, I'm not going to give any more, but I then go on and say, oh, all right, I'll do it. And I then mentioned that in the recent book, The Secret Life of Houdini, Kalush and Sloman say he also may have been an undercover intelligence gatherer for the Secret Service and Scotland Yard. So quite a busy lad.
Right, and that wouldn't be so hard to believe. I know there's a great book that was written, I think it was in 1962, by Harpo Marx. And, from the Marx Brothers. He was one of the first entertainers to be able to travel to other countries because everything he did in his show was a pantomime. And he actually became kind of a secret agent for the U.S. government when he would go to Russia and perform. He was the first American performer to go to Russia. They would smuggle back documents with the great Harpo Marx because nobody would assume this kind of bumbling buffoon would be any kind of political threat. So I could see Houdini certainly with his majesty and the way he was able to kind of come in and command people and be so looked upon with reverence that he could probably go in and out of places carrying secret documents and information constantly, and nobody would think to even ask him about that.
Yeah, you got it. So it's very, very conceivable that he was. Right. So the question is, there's so many areas about Houdini. Mm-hmm. Where do we go?
Well, you know what? A lot of people, I'm just curious on this, with his humble beginnings, and as we said, he kind of started off as a regular hand-to-hand illusionist and moved his way up. But at what point in his career did he become friends with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle?
Now there's kind of conflicting views on it. In the book, I mentioned 2 different views of one, but it was definitely in England. Houdini said that he had corresponded first with him, where the other story is Conan Doyle came to a show one night and went backstage and had a chat with him. But it was somewhere around 1918-ish, 1990, something like that, that they became friends because, again, in the book I point out the similarities between the two, which are absolutely great. And they shared this common knowledge, let's say, of spiritualism, slightly coming from two different ends, in that Doyle was an absolute fanatic. From about 1916, Doyle became an advocate. It tends to be said that because his son died in the First World War, he then contacted spiritualists and moved on from there as a complete believer. Houdini lost his mother, tried to contact her, and found that a lot of the spiritualists were using magician's tricks. Because spiritualism, modern spiritualism, let's say, goes from about 1848 with the Fox sisters, who started it all. But spiritualism itself goes back over several thousand years, i.e. contacting the dead. Goes right back to the Greeks. But
right, and Houdini, actually, people think that he was a debunker from the start. He actually employed mediums and psychics and people to run seances because he hoped that it would be true, that he could make that connection because of his overwhelming love and respect for his mother.
Yep. Well, I did find in researching the book, it took 20 years to accumulate everything and put it all together once I got hooked on it. But I found that he, prior to the 1900s, actually was a pseudo medium himself. His wife was, between the two of them. They would do things like go to a town. First thing they do is visit the graveyard to see who had recently died and pick up information that way from people. Send somebody around to the doors trying to sell something and, oh, who's just died recently? And, you know, trying to contact the person next door. Can you tell me about it? And there seems to be nobody there. That kind of thing. They pick up knowledge. But he soon got sort of turned off at himself because he could see how people were really accepting what he was saying. And it was not too nice to him in the end. So what he did, and this is what I've been able to put together, the fact that spiritualists, when they started, were... Let me take it right back to square one. Square one, if I say it was the Fox sisters, they started by hearing clicks. The thing is, Conan Doyle says, yes, it was on the 31st of March, and it all happened. 31st of March is the day before April Fool's Day. And the girls were hearing these clicks, these mysterious clicks, and it must have been people from beyond the dead. In the end, it was said they were clicking their toes, the joints of their toes to do it. But in those days, you had no television, you had no radio, and people on a Saturday night would get together, somebody would play the radio, and it became the in thing. Well, let's contact the dead. So it very quickly spread.
We haven't really evolved much, have we? We've gone from toe clicking being the entertainment of the day to sitting around watching the Housewives of Atlanta. There's not much difference in the intelligence quotient there, is there?
Very little difference. But and what was happening, of course, if somebody said, "Oh, you know, we contacted the great beyond," there was Katie King was the one. Everyone tried to contact Katie King, and this is why in the book that Lorna Gibb wrote, it's Katie King's story, and I put in it as Library of the Magic Circle, you know, trying to debunk a little bit. But everybody would try and outdo each other until you got to the state where, okay, this guy's good. The guy in the next town, he's better than anybody in our town. So in the end, they get him to come and do something in your town. And next thing you know, it became an act on vaudeville. And the Davenport brothers, there's two brothers, were in a cabinet, and they would allow people to tie them up, and still things would happen inside that cabinet that were done by the spirits. So what Houdini did was he moved the tying up out of the cabinet and challenged people to tie him up, and he would escape. So he actually evolved his act by using techniques the spiritualist had used.
Interesting. You're right, yeah. Because so many of them would claim, oh, look, put me in the spirit cabinet, tie me up, tie my hands down, and there's no way I could ring the bells, do the knocking. I could not be the one responsible for the quote-unquote spirit communication. Yet the whole time, as soon as they got their hands in, they would relax their muscles, slip their hands out of the binds, do what they had to do, slip their hands back in the binds to be released from the cabinet, and Houdini just brought it out into the light.
You got it. I've got a book. I'll hold this one up for you. Mm-hmm. There, can you see it?
Rope Ties and Escapes by Houdini.
You've got it. There's a picture of him as well on the cover. Now, in the foreword, Houdini actually says, now this was 1921-22. Mm-hmm. He says, the ties given, he's talking about in the book, are of two distinct types, namely those adapted to use in spiritualistic work and those intended for the escape artist. So he actually says you can use some of these if you're doing spiritualistic work. Hopefully it was for a pseudo-spiritualist act on stage. And then he goes on to say, for the former, a cabinet is usually necessary, and if not absolutely necessary, it's better to use one, as it lends an essential atmosphere to the seance. But in straight escapes, the cabinet hopelessly weakens the effect. Personally, in making escapes from ropes, I have not resorted to the use of the cabinet for more than 20 years past, preferring to make challenge tests and prove that I can free myself in less time than required to secure me. Now, we're approaching the bit that shows that Houdini's showmanship. Mm-hmm. But in the book, he actually says you can use my ties in spiritualist cabinets. So it's all very well to escape, but once you've escaped, what do you do next?
But boy, he's writing the book on it, and here he's almost, not almost, he's giving his mortal enemies the means to continue to confound and gain false trust from people.
Yes. But at the same time, he's saying...
So this guy, not only was he a marketing genius for what he did, but he created his own controversy in a way, because he was like feeding these people how to do what it was so that he could then go in and debunk them.
You got it.
What a genius.
Oh, they're using the thing from my book, I can tell. Now, if you think now, I'm going to back up slightly to his days of being escaping, because once you escape, okay, he's going to get out of them, great, but he takes it a step further. He adds a bit of showmanship, and he was great at the showmanship. I'll read the next bit. My assistant is always supplied with a stopwatch. In fact, for my underwater tests, I had specially made by a watchmaker in Glasgow the largest stopwatch in the world, by means of which persons in the gallery who did not possess such watches themselves could see the second hand as it jumped around the dial, and thus share in the interest. For you should know that not every theater goer carried a stopwatch. So in other words, is he going to do it in time? Creating this intrigue.
Right, and he learned from that too, right? Originally it will take you 40 seconds to shackle, chain, and link me up. I'll be out in 20 seconds. And then once he realized that was good, but the buildup was like, oh, okay. It's like once Christmas morning's over and the presents are open, there's really nothing left to do. He started toying with the audience and building the tension and taking longer. And am I right? He would actually, he'd start the clock. He'd go, do me a favor, everybody, hold your breath with me for 30 seconds. Just 30 seconds to give people a feel of how panicky that would cause them to be. And then he'd go, okay, now I'm going to go into the milk jug, or I'm going to go into the vat, or I'm going to go into whatever, and would be submersed this way. And you would feel that with him. Many of the people would try to hold their breath in the audience, as I understand. People were blacking out in the audience trying to keep up with whatever illusion Harry was doing at the time.
Yeah, in fact, he even practiced by immersing himself in a full tub of bath water and held his breath for as long as he could underwater. I think he got it up to well over 8 minutes at one point.
Wow. How does that not mess up the brain? He must have been in just an amazing meditative state.
Yeah. Oh, he was really,
more or less an expert at everything he tried. But the fact was, he could hold his breath for 8 minutes, right? But half the time, I met a guy at a magic convention in Chicago back in, I want to say it was like 80, 81, and a really nice guy, very old, claimed that he was an assistant on the stage for Houdini at one point during his career, and would say that the funny part was Houdini was so proficient at doing what he would do, they'd put him in, they'd seal the milk jug. By the time the curtain raised, he was already out of the milk jug sitting on it reading the newspaper. Yeah. And they would have to tell him to shut up because they could hear the pages flipping of the newspaper. That would be Houdini. Yeah, so he had all of these things figured out, but he would sit there, and sometimes they would even start thinking, oh, he's carrying this on too long. But the hysterics of the audience is what drove him, right? Because he could hear them gasping and screaming and let him out. And that buildup, that was almost orgasmic for him. Yeah, well, I did a search a while back on marketing, which is part of the showmanship ability, and Houdini is still number 5 on the all-time 10 in the world. He might be number 4 since Pepsi and United have both slipped a couple notches. I'll tell you what, we have to take a quick break. Bob Loomis is here, and we're going to continue talking about his book. We'll talk more about Houdini, spiritualism, ghosts, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Houdini's final incredible secret, the true story of how Houdini mystified the creator of Sherlock Holmes. We'll do that next on Beyond the Darkness.
Beyond the Darkness.
We're back, and this is the best in paranormal talk radio, Beyond the Darkness, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. You can check us out right here as we explore the strange and supernatural world around us. And remember, next week, we have the triumphant return of the full-time series True Crime Tuesday. So you can check out 2 episodes every Tuesday. You get Beyond the Darkness and True Crime Tuesday. So make sure you go subscribe to that on iTunes and follow it here on Podcast One. And make sure, we need your help again, make sure that on iTunes, if you're reading and following up with it there, you rate and review True Crime Tuesday, because we need it to grow quickly in the numbers and let them know that we're there and find more and a bigger, deeper audience. So please be a part of that for us by going to iTunes, and you'll find the True Crime Tuesday there. Just subscribe to it. Make sure you're a part of that so you never miss another episode. All right, we're back tonight, and we're talking with our guest, Bob Loomis. He's written a book called Houdini's Final Incredible Secret, the true story of how Houdini mystified the creator of Sherlock Holmes. Let's take it to that title real quickly, Bob. Not many people even realize there was a final secret and what was going on between Houdini and Doyle. Can you start to give us a history of those two gentlemen, and we'll start to build into what your book covers and what's going on? Yeah. Let me just show you. This is an article. After Houdini died, Conan Doyle did 2 articles in the Strand magazine, August and September 1927. And if you can see that, is that good enough? Houdini, the Enigma, right. Yeah. So Conan Doyle started off by saying, who was the greatest medium baiter of all time? Houdini. Further down said, and who was the greatest medium of all time? Houdini. So, in the end, Doyle came to the conclusion that Houdini was actually a medium himself and was using these occult powers. So, Houdini was trying to kind of steer him away from that. But at the same time, he didn't want to give away all the secrets of his craft. Because in those days, the secret was the whole be-all and end-all. Right. You didn't want your opposition to know how you did things. So it typically would be a magician, let's say like Houdini, would have one key assistant. Other assistants would be involved in different tricks, but they would only be allowed on stage for those specific tricks, so that when the opposition hired them away, they can only take that little bit of knowledge with them. Mm-hmm. So secrecy became the be-all and end-all of magicians of that era. These days, it's slightly different.
they're hidden in plain sight. Give you an example. I mentioned in the first half the Harry Price Library. Mm-hmm. It has over 10,000 books. The Magic Circle Library, which again I can show you a picture of. I'll hold this up so you can describe it.
Looks like a high school. Yeah, it looks like a high school library to me.
Yep. And the guy sitting in the middle is me, would you believe it?
Yeah. I thought I recognized that guy.
Yep. 10,000 plus books. We used to have 10,000, but a fellow died and left us another 5,000. And it took us a year to coordinate them all together. So people come into the library and they say to me, have you got anything on so-and-so? Because there's no way they can find it amongst all that. So secrets are hidden in plain sight, for want of a better term. So Houdini didn't really want, in those days, his secrets out. So he did a trick, which I'll give you the background on in a minute, for Conan Doyle, to show that Conan Doyle that he could do something better than any of the mediums did, but it was a trick. But when he did it, and Conan Doyle said, you got to be a medium, you got to be using the occult to do that, Houdini wouldn't explain what he did. So therefore, Conan Doyle wrote that article I've just shown you, Houdini was a medium.
And
right.
the two of them, I mean, here you've got a guy that created one of the best free thinkers in the world, right? You've got Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes and Mr. Watson stories. Of course, what a lot of people don't know, and they've gotten better at reviewing and revealing now in contemporary versions, is that his brilliant detective was also a heroin addict and had a myriad of mental problems. So there were dysfunctionalities involved in Houdini. So, there was flaws in Sir Arthur Conan Doyle as well. Here was a guy, you brought up his son died in the First World War. He wanted so much to make communication. And we're all in that, people who listen to our show, myself included, we all want to believe in something beyond what we know as normal. And it's so easy to want to just give into that. And it's funny because you have the want and desire of Houdini wanting it to be real, but realizing that most of it is not. And then you've got the want and desire of Conan Doyle wanting it to be real and kind of buying into everything.
Yep, absolutely. Part of the trouble that Houdini went to, basically what he did, I'll give you a quick outline of it, because I don't want to sort of do a spoiler alert for the book, if you see what I mean.
Sure.
The book is basically my 20-year research to doing the trick, and I break it down into various parts. Basically, Houdini had Conan Doyle put a slate in the middle. Now, do you know what I mean by a slate? An old school slate.
Right. Like a portable chalkboard, right? A little small portable chalkboard.
You got it. You got it. That's what it was. In those days, they would just use chalk for various things. You want to do an addition, you would do it in chalk. You could rub it out again. It's saved on pencil and paper.
Right.
And the mediums picked that up, and they would have messages appear on them. But basically, they would hold them onto the table or do something sneaky with them when the messages appeared. Houdini had Conan Doyle hold a slate up in the middle of a room, tied on two wires that were hooked over anything Doyle wanted to. So there, freely hanging in the middle of the room, was this slate. He then had Conan Doyle go outside, walk as far as he wanted, go around a corner, and write a message down that he wanted to appear on that slate. Doyle then came back. Houdini had him take a spoon and take a little ball, which Doyle had himself put into ink. He'd cut one in half to make sure it was a normal little cork ball. Hold it up to the slate, and the ball then rolled across the slate and wrote the message that Doyle had written down way down the road.
Well, that seems pretty amazing in itself, right? I mean, it's doing this right in front of him. The ball is scribing itself across the board and writing this. Okay. Now I could see where that would be something that would impress you to believe that there's something more than sleight of hand and smoke and mirrors creating this illusion.
And Houdini basically said, if I can do that through trickery, please have a very close look at anything any other medium does. I'll give you a little more background on how I got into it. I spend the first part of the book explaining how I got enwrapped in it, because back around the mid-90s, I'd heard that the place to be magically was on this new thing called the interweb or internet or something like that.
So it'll never catch on.
No, I didn't think it would, but I thought I'd have a go. So I wound up out there in the early days,
right,
surfing the net, doing my thing, and having a lot of fun and crossing swords or wands or whatever you want to call it with some of the magic nuts out there. Until one fella read a book called Nevermore, and in Nevermore was an explanation near enough what I've just explained. And he said, why don't we have a contest? And I got conned into being one of the judges. They did the contest, and magicians were supposed to tell, how did Houdini do it? At the end of the contest, we picked one, but it wouldn't have fooled a magician, but could have fooled Doyle with a bit of luck. I then remembered having read something similar in the Harry Price Library, which I mentioned again in part one. Mm-hmm. Well, I had a dig, and I came up with it, and it was a book written by a friend of Houdini's, and in it, he mentioned exactly that trick. So this was somebody that was actually there at the time, a magician, but it fooled him. So it not only fooled Doyle, who was a non-magician, but it fooled his friend, who then went on to become, when Houdini died, the president of the Society of American Magicians. So he was no fool. So at that point, I thought, it really was a trick. I dug further in, and for 90 years, magicians have been trying to explain it. But as they explained it, they were changing tiny little bits of it here and there to fit exactly with their theory. So they'd start with the theory and change what I just described to you to fit it. So in the end, I decided that one of two things. Either Doyle was right and Houdini was using the paranormal, or it was a trick that nobody's been able to suss out so far. One of two things. He used something that nobody had ever done before, and it has got lost and can't be found again. Or he went to one heck of a lot of trouble for just a few minutes one afternoon. And in the end, it turned out to be the latter. Took me 300 pages to explain it.
So he never did this for anybody else again? He never took this to a public display? It was only one time for Sir Arthur Conan Doyle? Yep.
There was a slight little variation, but not a lot. Without the slate, he did it. People would say he did the reverse. He went outside and some newspaper people were inside and decided on something. He then came in and told them what they had decided on. So that's kind of the reverse. But it looked to me from the beginning like it was a one-off that was very, very involved for that day. If you look at one of the reviews on Amazon US of the book, a fellow says exactly that. He said the more work went into that than David Copperfield did when he vanished the Statue of Liberty. So this is something that comes under the heading of what magicians call conjuring for conjurers.
Now, are you afraid that finally releasing the secret is going to kind of put you in a bad light among other magicians, for instead of just keeping it amongst the brotherhood, you're sharing it with the dirty, unwashed masses of the world?
No, because he went to so much trouble. As I said, it took 300 pages to sort out what it was. Magicians think, first of all, they're semi-happy if you've got to pay for it.
Okay.
Now, I've deliberately kept the price down.
Right.
It's only £10 in the UK or £13 in America. And a similar sort of thing, obviously, in other places. But I deliberately kept it down because at the moment, the Internet is full of one of the so-called theories. And my idea is to at least knock that on the head They tend to say it was actually hung up across the corner and somebody reached through with a rod and did it in reverse writing. And when you read the proper one, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it makes it sound more impossible with what they came up with than what Houdini probably actually did.
Yep. The other thing is, as long as I'm making people pay for it, but I deliberately say it in the book, I'm not exposing anything else. Give you a typical example. I spend a lot of time looking into various things like Houdini's background and how he would approach this. There's a fellow called John Cox, who's the acknowledged Houdini expert. If you look on the internet under his name, you'll find he's the expert. He actually reviewed the book and said it was a masterpiece, which I was very, very pleased with.
And that's John Cox, right?
Yeah.
Right, because you don't want to spell it wrong and look that up on the internet. I'm telling you, Bob, you're getting a lot of pages you weren't expecting.
Okay, try Wild About Harry, which could also be... that could also give you a few problems.
Do you find in any of the research with this close friendship that Houdini and Doyle reportedly had, with all that Houdini was able to show Doyle, did it ever change Doyle's convictions? Did he ever leave a medium and go, yeah, you know what, that was baloney. That I don't thank you for showing me, Harry. Or was he always stoic on his side of, oh, Harry, just because you can reproduce it doesn't mean that it can't happen naturally?
Yeah, it was more the latter, sadly, because this was, I go through a sort of several scenarios as to why he didn't expose it and tell Doyle what he did, because magicians find that as soon as everybody says, oh, magicians don't tell their secrets. The reason is you spoil it for the people looking at it. If I said to you, oh, it's only X, Y, Z, you go, oh, is that all? But you don't realize all the work that's gone into it, all the practice. And the bottom line is also you're putting the poor bugger out of work. Pardon my French.
And I do understand that aspect, but I mean, it got to kind of contentious at the end, right? I mean, between Houdini and Doyle, because
sadly, yes,
because Houdini was so vehement that his buddy was kind of in his eyes very simple, that he would believe all of this, and that now did he actually ask Lady Doyle to try to communicate with his mother, or was that something she did on her own to try to convince Houdini that it existed?
Yeah, the story tends to be that Doyle and Mrs. Doyle said, well, we can have a go for you if you like and try and contact her. And then Houdini kind of poo-pooed it in the end. They did the seance for him. There was written messages and there was a cross on it and that kind of thing. And in the end, Houdini said, well, for starters, the cross is Christian and she was Jewish. Her husband was a rabbi. Secondly, she didn't speak English. So I don't think she's learned English in the hereafter. So that kind of started the rot between the friendship.
I heard a fascinating aspect of that whoever the medium is, if he had spoken to a French medium, the message would have come through in French. If he'd have spoken to a Russian medium, it might have come through in Russian. It was whoever's translating the information that they're getting. And I often thought it was funny that, she was a devout a Jew, and what if she went and found out and her message to him was Christ, right? And that's why there was a cross. I mean, that's what the contemporary mediums would have you believe, is that this was the message she was trying to convey, is that, Harry, what we believe may not be right. Here's something you need to know. and trying to do a magician's reveal without giving away too much herself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to me, it's sort of two things. One, I would love to, I've reached the point now where I'm just entered the last quarter of my first century and I'm getting nearer to the finish line. I'd like it to be true myself.
Well, there are some very talented mediums out there who I have seen do things and produce things that I can't think. But again, it doesn't mean that it can't be reproduced, right? I mean, there are magic tricks and there are illusions. And as Houdini proved to Doyle, I can do this. If I can do this in front of you, then there's no way that what you think is going on is actually going on. You know, because we all want to believe. We want to have that experience for ourselves, that we're not bound by the mortal coils, and that we will be able to, kind of live above the physical realm. I know there's been a lot of rhetoric about the fact that Houdini has made this claim that if anybody could come back, it will be the great Houdini. I will be the one to finally show if this is true or not. And I know there's that famous piece of audio of Houdini's wife saying, "This is our final time. We've tried this for years. He hasn't come through. So good night. Good luck. Drink your Ovaltine," and that was the end of it. But there have been
magicians actually carry on.
Right.
I know she had the last seance, but they actually still do carry on each year on the anniversary of his death.
And which is fascinating to me, because I know Penn Jillette, who is like one of the biggest decriers of fraud and chicanery and ghosts and paranormal. As a matter of fact, we've tried to have him on our show for the last 12 years, saying, we would love to talk with you about your belief system. We're totally not here to bash you or anything. And basically the answer we got from his publicist was, why would he waste his time talking to you about reality when you troll all this BS out to your people on a regular basis? And, I found that fascinating, yet I found out he goes to most of these seances to be there to lay witness. And I guess there's still that kernel of childhood in all of us, right? Where, it's one time I don't go, he's going to show up, and I got to be there for that.
Yeah. Well, they even held it at the Magic Circle one year.
And nothing, right? Nothing has ever come through. I mean, I've heard different messages that his message eventually did come through and that they were able to validate it. But do we have any true confirmation on that at all?
No. Well, what happened was in one of the recent books mentions it more than anything. When Houdini died, she went slightly off the rails, Bess did. There's talk of her not only into drink, but also drugs as well. And in that sort of dark period, for want of a better term, the message is supposed to have come through. But afterward, people put her together with a fellow called Edward Saint. And they became an item, for want of a better term again. And he kind of straightened her out, and she said no, it was all a load of rubbish. So he didn't really come through. And that's when they started the official ones. And so, but that's kind of kept a little bit quiet for the fact that she was off the rails, if you see what I mean.
Trying to maintain her dignity, I guess, right?
You got it.
Okay.
You got it.
All right. Yeah. I understand that. And they end up having this big falling out, yet at Houdini's death, Conan Doyle writes a few articles and is interviewed quite often about their friendship, and he really only had good things to say about Houdini.
Yeah, but it kind of falls into the usual bit. Have you ever been to a funeral and people have said, he was a load of rubbish, he was awful?
No. We might be thinking it, but I don't know that anybody's actually said it out loud, but I'm with you on the idea.
Yeah. So I think it sort of falls into that. Now, Doyle was no fool. Again, I mentioned this in the book. He was no fool. Houdini was using Doyle as my great friend Conan Doyle to help publicize himself, because Doyle, the two of them really, were the most famous people of their era. Right? If you said today to somebody, tell me the 5 greatest magicians ever, who would they be?
Harry Houdini, David Copperfield.
You got it. And then
see, I grew up in a different era though, so mine would have been Doug Henning, and that would have been more the lines of it. But then you go back and there's, the amazing Randy certainly makes a point to think he's one of them. Blackstone, you've got quite a few other. Thurston, right, was the other big name.
Well, 2 names you mentioned there, Blackstone and Randy. Bring them up in a minute. Now, the other question is, if I said to you, who was the greatest fictional detective?
That would definitely be Matt Helm, as portrayed by Dean Martin in all of the Matt Helm movies.
Right, and
maybe not him. I guess Sherlock Holmes.
You got it. So in the top couple, now Houdini died 90 years ago. Doyle died shortly thereafter. Yet their products are still out there today in the psyche, aren't they?
Right. So
each one was kind of using the other to bolster his views.
And his agenda. Right. And kind of keeping that. And what's funny is in death, Houdini couldn't deflect Conan Doyle. So here Conan Doyle kind of has the final sting, if you will, right? Because in the end, he comes back and goes, listen, this is my great friend Harry, and although we had rough times, he was an amazing man, but I believe he truly was a paranormalist. He was the power. So he kind of had that final dig at Houdini, which probably drove Houdini nuts if there is an afterlife, right?
Yeah. Now, if anybody ever says to you, Bess came through, Bess Houdini, treat it with a great disdain, because she actually said, I mentioned it in the book again, that even if I find I can come back, I'm not going to.
Oh, really? She went on record as saying that?
Yep. She'd obviously had enough of 10 seances trying to get through to Houdini. So. Now, you mentioned in passing, you triggered off several things in my mind by mentioning Randy and mentioning Blackstone.
Right, the amazing Randy and Blackstone, yes.
Now, there was Blackstone Jr., but there was Blackstone Sr. And he goes back to my childhood. I actually saw him in Toronto in the 1950s. And that was, I said to you, it's either triggered off by getting a magic set or seeing a magician.
Right.
And I saw Blackstone Sr. Small catch there. He played at the last vaudeville house in North America, which was in Toronto. And the week before, it had been strippers, but it was Blackstone that week. So I was a young teenager. I went to see. Went to school a week later because it was during school holidays. And I said to everybody, I went to the casino last week. And they all went, oh, cool. I forgot to tell him it was a magician and not the strippers.
You forgot? Really? I don't think you forgot that at all, Bob.
Now, not too much longer after that, a carnival showed up outside. Our little village was right on the edge of Toronto. It's long since been swallowed up now. But in the field on the outside, a carnival showed up. And I went into the sideshow there, and there was a magician. And when you see your first magicians, you remember everything they did. And there on the stage was this tall fellow in a turban, and he did some wonderful things. And I found out a good 50 years later, it was James Randi.
Oh, really? Okay, so you got to see both of them.
Yep. Now, he was, give me 1 second, his name was Prince. I'm going to hold something up.
Okay. He's darting across the room here, folks.
See this?
Yes, Prince Ibis, the mysterious master of something. I couldn't see the bottom line. It's still, you got to lift it up a little bit higher for me. Yep. What does it say?
Wandering and levitation.
Oh, okay. All right.
That was Randy.
Very cool. So you had a chance to see both of them kind of at their peak as well. How did they compare? I mean, were they illusionists? Were they tricksters? What would, were they the showmen of Houdini's caliber and character, but he had become legend at that point?
You got to remember, Blackstone was on the stage with the stage act. Right? He had all the glamour of the stage and everything, whereas when I saw Randy, he was just on a platform about my eye level in an old sideshow. So it was sort of horses for courses. but each one was the best of what they were, if you see what I mean.
Sure.
Yep. But the thing was, and this is what I said to you earlier, you don't really want to know how things are done because it spoils it. This was a similar thing. When I met him at Blackpool here in England at a magic convention, this is 50 years later at least, there was this little old guy who hardly came up to my shoulder, who was an ancient old boy. And I thought, what happened to this tall guy in a turban? So, but it definitely was him, because I described his act to him, and he said, yes, that was it.
Is there any reference in any of the literature, any of the research that you did about Houdini? Was there ever anybody, I know we've heard of the great Marjorie. She was kind of one of his biggest adversaries. And there were times that he almost seemed astonished by her, but would refuse to kind of yield to the idea that maybe she was as good as she was. Was there ever a point where he kind of bought into somebody's abilities to do these things, to communicate?
Well, what you got to remember, in most cases, Houdini, although, you got to start with Kellogg is the first book on Houdini. Let me hold that up. That's the first book, I'll open it up to the... See, being a librarian, you do everything by books.
Yes.
There it is.
Houdini, His Life Story by Harold Kellogg, Kellock. So for our listeners that are looking to find that book.
Yeah. Now, it's from the recollections and documents of Beatrice Houdini. Now, you got to remember, as soon as a magician makes it in the world, he reinvents himself. Because you've got to have glamour, you've got to have a great background. So that was the first book that all the others are kind of based on. They start from that. But there is a quote, and I mentioned it in my book, that Hardin, Houdini's brother, says it was the biggest load of rubbish you ever heard of.
So what he did was he created, he kind of vanilla iced the world at the time, right? He created a false background to make himself seem like a different person.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. The people in New York, he told them he was born in Wisconsin.
Right.
People in London, he told them he was born in New York. Where was he born? Budapest in Austria-Hungary.
Yeah, isn't Wisconsin, Appleton, Wisconsin, where they still have his supposed childhood home and museum and everything there?
Yeah, they just bought a copy of my book in the library.
But he did live in Appleton at some point, I'm guessing.
Oh, he did for a few years.
So it was just, as he became more well-known, he needed a better PR wagon, so he would pitch it to whatever made him sound more mysterious or more powerful, because I'm sure, as you go, he's some hokum from Appleton, Wisconsin is not going to be the kind of story that you want. And when you're the great American magician, Harry Houdini, maybe telling people you were born in Budapest is not the way to endear yourself to the people.
Yeah, you got it. Wow. So that's just a typical. Now, all these seances that he's supposed to have been to, he actually had 20 private detectives going to them all on his behalf, because he got so well known. The minute he came in the door, even in disguise, there would be...
His disguises were funny. I've seen some of those pictures, and they remind me of when the Three Stooges would wear disguises in their episodes. It's like, you're not fooling anybody with that look, Harry. Come on.
You got it. So,
well, Bob, it's been fascinating. I love stuff on Harry Houdini. I love the research, and I'm so intrigued. Like you said, here it is, 90 years since he passed away. Yeah. And people are still fascinated by this guy. Why do you think? I mean, let's face it. For my generation, David Copperfield was our Harry Houdini.
Yeah.
Right? I got to be honest with you. I just was in Vegas in January, and I had a chance to see him. I saw him when I was a kid. I saw him when he was performing in the play Young Harry Houdini. And he actually walked me to my seat because I got lost when I went to the restroom by myself. And I got backstage somehow, and he walked me back to my seat and then came out and did the show as Harry Houdini. So I wanted to see him, and my son was like, "Hey, Dad, for my birthday, I'd love to see Copperfield." And as we were walking by the desk, they had Copperfield tickets on sale. So I'm like, "Listen, this is a calling. We need to go." We went in there, and I felt like I was watching somebody's uncle perform a birthday party. There was some really cool, interesting bits that he does. I don't want to give away, because if you ever do go see him, I mean, it's worthy to knock off your bucket list to say you saw Copperfield. but I just wish I hadn't seen him on this end. You know, I mean, I wanted the tucks and tails and the magic and the beautiful showgirls kind of Copperfield that we watched on TV. This was kind of, like I said, your uncle walking through a show. Very disheartening to see the newer show, but you know, he still did a few fascinating aspects. And for our show, our listeners, he does evoke time travel. He evokes a UFO, an alien, ghosts. It's really that aspect of it was really cool. It was the rest that I just felt like he was even tired of doing what he was doing.
Yeah. Well, what you got to remember is you went in with a preconceived notion.
Right.
Now you're getting back to Doyle again.
Right. Yeah. There you go. Well, still, I don't know anybody. I think even Bob, if you would have gone, you'd have been like, okay, that's nice. Fun little show. It wasn't the grandeur we were hoping for. But why do you think that 90 years later, Harry Houdini still has this something we can't quite put our finger on? Why is he still so magical? I mean, we know how he's done most of the tricks now, and you've now exposed one of the final secrets in your book. Why is he still so powerful a figure? I mean, he admits that it was chicanery and fraud, that he wasn't passing through metal bars. He had wires hidden in the calluses of his feet. His wife would kiss him and shove a key in his mouth. We know that these great escapes were much easier than he made them seem. And all of this, yet he is still held, even by me, in such high regard for what he was and who he will always be. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, the legend has reached the point that it won't go away now. It continues to grow. Give you an example. People still do escapes. Magicians still do escapes.
Right.
But they don't take on anything, which is what Houdini did. He was a little guy against the world. He said, okay, here I am.
And he was the first to do it. And all of the others that have come after are just repeats of something that's been done before.
You got it. He was the first one to really challenge everyone. I've talked to sort of the last guy, really, that took on all challenges, and his wording was, I was crazy.
Well, you can follow Bob on Facebook. Just go to facebook.com/Houdini's Secret. That's Houdini's Secret, all one word. And you can find his book, Houdini's Final Incredible Secret, the true story of how Houdini mystified the creator of Sherlock Holmes. And remember, if you go to buy it off Amazon.com, use our link, our Killer Deals link, either at podcast1.com or at darknessradio.com, and use the associated Amazon link, because every purchase you make through those links, a small portion goes to keep our show on the air and pay for our streaming fees and our administrative costs. So just do that, help us out, and get the books and awesome documentaries, stories, and more that you hear from our guests right here. Bob Loomis, thank you so much for being a part of our world tonight.
You're very welcome.
Special thanks to our sponsors for the day, True Car. So when you're ready to buy, visit True Car to enjoy a more confident car buying experience. Over 3 million cars sold, 13,000 certified True Car dealers around the United States, and over 700,000 pre-owned vehicles available right now. That'll save you around $3,000 off the manufacturer's suggested retail price. Check it out, True Car. And we want to thank our buddies at BarkBox. Remember, we've got a special deal for you. You can sign up with BarkBox and get a 1, 6, or 12-month plan that is available. And they're shipped out on the 15th of each month. You get a brand new box of treats and fun toys for your furry friend. And we're going to get you an extra free month of BarkBox. Just visit getbarkbox.com/darkness when you subscribe. That's getbarkbox.com/darkness. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow with even more of the best in paranormal talk radio here on Beyond the Darkness.